That message will check together. Okay. Okay. Yeah, Dr. Nitya, good morning. Can you switch on your camera? Yeah, good morning, Nitya. Thanks for making this possible. So I'll just welcome all of you to the program that we have today. So the topic actually for the session is neglected and underutilized species for food and nutrition security in the era of climate change. And we have with us Dr. Professor Nitya Rao. She is a professor of gender and development in the University of East Anglia, and she's also a trustee of the MSSRF. We have our speakers who will be Dr. Oliver King, who is the Director of Biodiversity based at MSSRF, Dr. R. Rangalakshmi, who is the Director of Ecotechnology based at MSSRF. And we have with us Dr. R. Gopinath, who is the Principal Scientist at MSSRF. So the three of them will be talking about the subject on how neglected crops and species are actually thinly distributed and how important it is to have these crops for our food and nutrition security. So I'll give the floor now to Professor Nitya Rao, who will chair the session.
Yeah, thank you, Sangeeta. I hope you can hear me all right.
Yeah, we can clearly hear you.
Yeah, so I'm very happy to welcome you all. I'm sorry I'm not there with you in person, but very happy to welcome you all to this session, very important session on neglected and underutilized species for food and nutrition security in an era of climate change. I think these traditionally have been crops which have had sort of low status. They have been socially stigmatized. They have been, but the lifeblood really and the lifeline of a lot of rural people, poor people. They're both sort of cultivated and uncultivated crops. And I think more recently, there is an increasing interest in some of these crops, which are seen as both climate resilient and highly nutritious, which have kind of declined over the last several decades. I think there are many initiatives now in terms of, revival of forgotten foods. They have variously been called wild foods, uncultivated foods, neglected species, underutilized, and so on. But clearly, somewhat derogatory, negative words, but clearly they have a lot of potential. And I think in this year particularly, which the UN FAO has declared as the International Year of Millets, I think is a good time to put the spotlight on some of these neglected and underutilized species, which is millets, of course, but also much beyond millets as well. So what I will do, I think Sangeeta has briefly introduced. So this session really, the next 1.5 hours is for us. We'll hear from three speakers, brief interventions, but it's really to discuss the importance of these foods, which have been traditionally stigmatized, not utilized, and how they can actually help both to solve the problem of malnutrition. And India particularly is a country which is very high on the global hunger index, very high in terms of malnutrition, especially child stunting and wasting globally. And this is a paradox because we have the wealth, but at the same time, we're not doing so well in terms of nutrition. On the other hand, there's also the whole issue of climate change and adaptation to climate risks, and how can agriculture or food systems really develop transformative pathways which both fulfill the double goal of addressing nutrition problems, but also maintaining secure incomes, livelihoods for the farmers, for the producers in the face of climate threats. Of course, with many of these crops, sometimes also called forage crops, as I said, or uncultivated crops, I think women have been at the center of preserving and foraging and collecting many of these and cultivating many of these crops. So there's an important also gender dimension, gender equality dimension to this whole discussion on neglected and underutilized species. So I'm not going to say much more than that now, but I would like to introduce our three speakers who will request that you make interventions for about 12 to 15 minutes each. I can maybe give you a signal, but it's more difficult online to do that, so that we do have some time, at least for 20 to 30 minutes for discussion at the end. So I would like to first invite Dr. Oliver King, who's a plant biologist by training, but he's also the director of biodiversity at MSSRF, the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation based in Chennai, with over 25 years of experience in participatory research and development in the fields of agrobiodiversity, natural resource management, value chains, gender, and in fact, sustainable development more broadly. So Oliver, I'd request you to speak for about 12 to 15 minutes. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, madam. Yeah. Good afternoon, one and all. First of all, let me thank the chair, Dr. Nithya Rao, for anchoring this entire session. And I also join with Dr. Rangalakshmi and Dr. Gopinath. I'm happy about sharing some of our experience working with the communities in the area of neglected and underutilized species in the last 2 decades. As you all aware, the foundation, MS Swaminathan Foundation, initiated their work in the area of NUS, neglected and underutilized species, in the mid-90s, one of the pioneering organization in the country. I would say, when the EPIGRI, they have started our work, even before that, they have actually initiated the work on NUS. If you look at the parlance that is being used in the literature, NUS, the neglected and underutilized, these are the two terminologies are widely used. When we talk about neglectedness, where these species are neglected, it is those species and the crop diversity neglected from the science and technology or support system. From that angle, they are looking at the neglectedness. When people talk about the underutility, those crops actually have been grown widely, but over a period of time, due to competitiveness in the given agroecology, that is being neglected. So both from the perspective of research and development dimension, it has been neglected for a very, very long time. In other words, there are certain crops, commodity crops, have been given more thrust. On the other side, many crops have been neglected. On the other side, due to market pressure, farmers' preferences, competitiveness, even in the agroecology that favors certain crops, these crops were underutilized. So from that angle, the global communities, they have started looking at what are the key features of neglected and underutilized species. Predominantly, these are the key traits of the NUS species people have identified. They have limited or low competitiveness, and it is by and large related to local culinary culture, and local consumption and production system favors these NUS crops. And mostly these crops are adaptive to the local agroecological condition and the precipitation and weather pattern and so on. And interestingly, some of these species are more resilient to the climate risk, easily can combat in the context of the lower precipitation, even the fragile situation, it can come back. And most of the custodians, they conserve these crops are rich in traditional knowledge in terms of both agricultural management as well as culinary culture. Even some of them are used for health systems as well. So on the other side, look at the supply chain and value chain. It is poorly established, and since there is no policy support or non-existent in this case. And but on the contrary, increasing realization, as Dr. Nithya pointed out, in the recent times we are facing global climate risk and local weather precipitation changes that is impacting on our food security. On the other side, nutrition poverty, where actually alarmingly increasing level of malnutrition, particularly for women, children, and even for the aged. And people see that we need to look for alternative crops in a system. So there are a lot of research investment thanks to international organizations, FAO, IFAD, SDC, and many other organizations. They have invested in mid-90s And if you look at, there are NUS crops have been popularized in the recent past. If you look at the teff in Ethiopia, if you look at the literature, a lot of investment have gone there. In case of quinoa, there is an Andean grain in Bolivian region where people have invested a lot of money. And another spicy rocket, which is Eruga sativa, which is also one of the underutilized species in the Mediterranean region now that is being mainstreamed. These are the global, popular examples around the world that we see. You see some of the pictures of quinoa. Some of you may not have seen this, and it's a very popular Andean grain. Now it is being widespread across the country because of its nutrition potential and properties and so on. And this is a teff. Teff is one of the staple food grain of Ethiopians and Eritreans, where actually most of their bread is based on the teff. Now it is also spreading across Europe as well. And the other one is that the spicy rocket plant, it's a Diplotaxis. This is also now very popular in Italy because of for its nutrition property and widely grown in the Italian region, though it comes from the Mediterranean region. And if you look at the NUS species, there is a wide range of species now being researched. And you see from the literature that, right from babo, which is from Africa, and pigeon tree from India, jute mallow, chaya tree from Africa, again, fonio, and even our moringa. Also, it's been restricted. You see from the context, it is only available in the southern part of India and also in Sri Lanka. It is an Indo-Sri Lankan element. If you look at the, the paleontology, perspective, if you look at it, there is a regional specific. So it is not widespread. Even I have seen in Africa, people do have a lot of moringa, but they don't know about its value. And we cherish for its nutrition property in terms of iron. So the NUS species are there in some location which is not known elsewhere. So that give a lot of impetus in terms of bringing it into a mainstream food system. So these are the list of species elsewhere in different places people are working on, not only from the nutrition point of view and also climate resilient building point of view, because most of them are climate resilient, climate hardy, but grown in limited scale, and less research investment has gone in, and they want to bring it back. So we have published recently with the nutrition, where we actually listed over 100 such species now in the research and development. People are looking at from that point of view. Some of the pictures, this is a babo plant and jute mallow, pigeon tree, chaya, fonio, and moringa, all know, tapari bean, bambara granite, and also zizibus, the Zizibus xyloparus. In Tamil, we call it as elandai. It is very rich in iron and magnesium, and it's grown in certain dry tracts, and people now wants to leverage its nutrition potential in the mainstream food system as well. And amaranth, again, it is an intercropping system in the rainfed farming system, and in Africa, there are many people working on this. And as far as India is concerned, millet has been seen as a neglected crop, because after the intervention, great intervention of green revolution, some of the investment have gone much to certain millet species, not all. In case of finger millet, sorghum, and pearl millet, there are a lot of investment parallelly has happened as compared to rice and wheat, but there are other neglected species within the millet, in the basket. It has not gone in. For instance, little millet, Italian millet, kodo millet, proso millet, and foxtail millet, even the brown top millet, there is not yet much attention have gone in. So we call them as a neglected and limited minor crop within the basket of millet system. And you see, these are the major millet, sorghum and pearl and finger millet, and these are the minor millet within that basket as well. And we at MSSRF, we are working on millets for the last 2 decades to bring back some of the land races and folk varieties and farmers varieties of these millets into the landscape. Why millets in India is now important? We have seen alarming increasing malnutrition as well as, and the millet can go well within the rainfed system and go well with even wherever the precipitation levels are going low. It can be adapted by the farmers. And it is also rich in many nutrition property and health properties and so on. We can read it through literature. And it has a comparative advantage compared to rice and wheat and maize. Most of the three major commodity crops, all other minor millets, if you look at the fiber, fat, the iron, the calcium and ferrous, and comparative advantage of it. That's why India now pitched in the United Nations to bring back as a millet as not only for India and also for the global community. And when you look in the context of NUS, specifically to the millets, we have experimented when we talk about the four C's of it: the conservation domain, cultivation domain, consumption, and commerce, and adding on to the research and development perspective, right from seed to market, seed to plate, uh, a concurrent attention for all these aspects, if that is provided by empowering local community, the NUS crops like millet can be brought back to the mainstream system that we have witnessed. If you see this organogram here, we look at from the genetic diversity by mapping as well as cultivation and looking at the harvest system, reducing drudgery and adding value to the community, empowering local community with skill sets and creating market linkages for the local community. Some of the pictures just wanted to rush it through, and in order to do this, what one has to do and what we are advocating to other agroecologies and other conditions, we need to identify NUS hotspots. There are many because it is locally restricted. So we need to identify NUS hotspots where the custodian farmers are there, particularly women, their knowledge is there. And also we need to chronicle climate resilient farming. Most of the NUS crops are good with actually mixed farming system. Most of the nut species are there. So we need to, as a research and developmental, agencies as well as researchers, we need to identify what are the best practices wherein the nest has been actually integrated. That kind of a documentation is essential. Then we need to really recognize the custodian farmers. They have been actually keeping these NUS for a very, very long time in their food culture. And although stigmatized, all these things are there in the mainstream society, it is a part of their food culture, and they have been growing and consuming all these years. So we need to recognize their contribution and so on. And MSSRF is actually networking, identifying those custodian farmers, women, and so on, and network them as a custodian farmer network in the agroecologies where we work. And we also need to recognize Professor Swaminathan has contributed to two important legislations in the country, the Biodiversity Act as well as Protection of Plant Variety and Farmers' Rights Act, wherein we are actually recognizing this custodian. When we recognize custodian, the contribution of custodian in terms of conserving it, NUS automatically comes in. So that is the way in which we can definitely retain this NUS crops and species on farm as well as in the resource ecologies. And linking NUS in the in situ on farm both as well as in the ex situ collection, where actually our scientists, they used to go and collect and characterize it and document it and link it with our seed system. And seed system, when we talk about, we have Scrasia magnosa gene bank here, and also it is linked with national level, our genetic laboratories and gene bank and so well, NPPGR and so well. And what is required? This is one side. On the other side, the custodian needs to be supported with some institutional mechanisms. That is where the agencies are very important. The community seed bank needs to be nurtured. Appropriate technology we need to give in the context of millets. As in the case of other NUS crops, appropriate technology needs to be developed, which is not yet done much. So there is an immense potential for R&D like us to explore those potential also. In case of millets, improved agronomic practices. There are certain techniques are involving certain drudgery, but that has been introduced, in wanting of actually improved yield as well as potential income. So the technologies have been done in a more participatory way, and it has been taken up. And recently in Odisha, alternative seed system model has been tested, where it is inclusive of both improved variety as well as the local variety. The farmers, they have made choice, and the seed system of the local community have been ensured. We call it as alternative seed system. Wherever the public seed system could not penetrate and reach to the local community, we need to have a local level seed system. That is what we call it as alternative seed system. And farm implements, particularly the drudgery aspects of it, that has to be both at the on-farm level as well as processing level. We need to look at it. That has been done in the context of NUS. And very specifically linking both youth, not the children, their interest and connected to food culture is very, very important. In order to retain the MUS in the food system, the documentation of local culinary culture is very critical. And where we can take off from there and link it with the empowering women as a self-help group or farmer producer organization, thereby creating economic stake in conservation of NUS. And again, some elements of nutrition labeling, nutrition analysis that can create kind of new edge for the farmer friendly food system, both in terms of market as well as local. So such value addition opportunity MSSRF is doing with different, in coordination with different agricultural universities as well as culinary agencies, we have been doing. Branding, again, any kind of brand. Now we are in the era of markets. In order to reach out NUS to markets, the branding and labeling, eco-labeling or ethnicity-based labeling is very essential, where we can link NUS and ethnicity as well as linking with market. So such initiatives are happening across India now, and also in wherever the agroecology, where people are talking about NUS. And community asset creation, when we talk about rural development, without creating an asset, physical asset, as well as knowledge asset for the local community, bringing back the NUS, it's a kind of uphill task. So MSSRF is doing that. We create a lot of assets in terms of procurement centers and seed banks and other systems, and also the statutory norms and principles in place. We are doing it. And again, reaching out to markets, that is where we are struggling, and we have been taking different approaches. And that helps now linking even with the PDS, public distribution system, as far as our intervention is concerned, both in Koraput region as well as in Kolli. Now the produce reach to the Urmas in case of Koraput. In case of Kolli, now our products are reaching to the public distribution system. So to reach up to the level, link the local community to this level, it takes time. And it involves a lot of processes. That is what MSSRF is trying to do. And for the children nutrition education, wherein we specifically need to talk about NUS, because all the time in the last 30-40 years, after this noon meal program, where predominantly the rice and wheat is used, but now, in order to link this NUS, there is a lot of education, nutrition education need to happen. We work with school children, and also create literacy, legal literacy in the context of NUS for the value chain actors. And engagement, professor always used to say, we create image for NUS. And way back in mid-90s, professor, I still remember professor saying, we create new image for NUS. So right from the beginning, engaging custodian farmers, tribal communities, women, and creating a platform for them to come over there, talk about their problems and constraints, and resolve in a more participatory way. That's a pathway that we have taken up, and we have pitched this with the policy also, both at the national level, even at the state level. Now in Tamil Nadu, they have also included. They have started millet mission, as well as they have also created an organic policy where a lot of thrust have been given for the NUS. And orphan crops, this is a latest book that jointly with the Biodiversity International, with whom we have initiated a work in mid-90s. This is a compendium of best practices available across the globe that talks exclusively on NUS. And this is now available online also. And this creates a lot of opportunity for discourse around NUS, and this is a happy moment for all of us, those who are working on NUS. And recently, the FAO also taken up the global manifesto on forgotten crops. In other words, is the NUS, neglected and underutilized crops. Give a lot of thrust on bottom-up approach, participatory management of NUS, and working in harmony with the NRS, National Agricultural Research System, because unless the voice of the marginals are heard by the NRS system, mainstreaming NUS is impossible. So that's a strategy. The FAO at the international level, as well as in India, we have been working very closely with them. So all these efforts, we believe that this will address important sustainable development goal elements, particularly addressing zero hunger, as well as good health and well-being, as well as life on land. I think I stop here. If there are any questions around that, we will be happy to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Oliver, for covering a huge ground within exactly 15 minutes. So congratulations. And I think you have set the context very well. I think what I would like to do is maybe move on to the next two speakers. If anybody has questions for clarification or otherwise, please keep noting it down and we can open up the floor for a more consolidated discussion at the end of the three interventions. So next, I would like to invite Dr. Rangalakshmi, who's also Director Eco-Technology at MSSRF. And she has also worked, like Oliver, for a long time, about 25 years, in development research and practice in the field of agriculture and natural resource management. And Dr. Rangalakshmi has also been very much interested in the broader area of sustainable livelihoods, climate change, gender, and how the role really of technologies, institutions, and policies in this whole science society interface. So over to you, Ranga.
Thank you, Nitya. And thank you, Oliver, for setting the context. And in the NUS context, we need to see how the gender dimensions have been integrated or it's going and how it can be enhanced. So in this context, we need to see the whose context we have been referring NUS. Whether from our, as a researcher, from our end, are we considering those crops as NUS or from the local community? So always when we ask these questions, then we'll be in a position to see how our interventions can be fine-tuned. And also recently, in the recent past, FAO is more interested to bring some of the NUS as future smart foods, future crops. And also they have been advocating agroecology approach to diversify the farming systems, basically to ensure the nutrition security as well as the environmental security, along with the livelihood context. So in that aspects also, there is a need to diversify the farming systems with more number of crops, more number of nutritious crops. And also there are at the policy side, the contexts have been changing, and India itself, the National Food Security Act 2013, it was implemented, and in that they have brought in millet as a kind of an, especially small millet, as part of the public distribution systems. So that changed the paradigm of the crops or the produces available to the consumers at different levels. And in this case, it provides economic opportunities for rural women, especially they have been associated with such NUS crops in different contexts, as said by Nitya. And there are cases also, there have been evidences created so far, how it is supporting the nutrition enhancement, especially with children as well as women, and how this food consumption has been changing the diet diversity of the women as well as children and making other nutritional impact. And often, as said by Nitya, it is a women's crop. But when it is getting into a kind of a mainstream context and the role of men comes, and in that women getting marginalized, that is also increasing in certain crops. We have literature and evidences for that. And here we need to see how their knowledge systems, and it should be not only based on gender, other intersectional variables we need to consider. In our context, there are more age, occupation, or other social variables. We need to see how the knowledge systems are getting affected or challenging the NUS crop to coming as a kind of a mainstream crops. So in this context, very specific set of gender agenda we can consider, and it has been in practice also. One is creating markets and developing value chains. So as Oliver explained, in many of the small millet species, right from the beginning, since 1996 to till date, the whole value chain in small millets has been developed by MSSRF. So in that, we brought in the gender dimensions right from the beginning, since it is a crop which is associated with women and they take decision in most of the agronomic practices, processing, as well as the household consumption. So in that paradigm, how this gender dimensions right from the beginning helped us to bring women till achieving the benefits. So it is a classic case, and the similar system needs to be expanded to other NUS crops when we are working on. And second part is characterization and documentation. As he said, many of our accessions are in both national as well as the community level gene banks. But when we characterize, many of the even passport details itself, they don't have any space for documenting the traditional knowledge of men and women farmers. So MSSRF played a major role in bringing how such gendered knowledge systems can be integrated in the passport detail itself. So that is the second evidence that how the men and women's knowledge systems in different life cycle of the crop development can be part of that system. Here in millet case, we have identified its with ethnobotany, ecology, how different land races have been cultivated throughout Kolli Hills context, and how it is used, and specific nutritional qualities of each minor millet species. Those have been documented and taken to the next level by adding in the passport details. And the third important aspects, not only in minor millets or small millets, in any other crops, we need to develop kind of an document which is aligning with the legal entities of convention CBD or any other legal provisions available at the global level. So in that, one methodology they have been promoting is the biocultural protocols. Biocultural protocols provide a very broader framework. It documents the knowledge systems as well as the processes they are taking up to promote the cultivation and the environmental aspects. So such kind of documents help people to get recognition as well as take the initiative to the next level. And the fourth important point is building the capacities. When we develop the whole value chain right from the beginning, from seed to entering into the consumer level, there are several steps in which their capacities needs to be built in as a kind of an conscious effort. And that such kind of support services will help women or marginalized men also to be part of the whole process. It gives them their identity and improve their agency and visibility as part of their empowerment process. And the fifth one is, as I said, market is the emerging one. And with the improving digital infrastructure context, we need to provide some of the additional niche market tools. And in that, the important ones are geographical indicators. Now the systems are available for application. So such NUS crops are highly localized. So such systems can take advantage of this kind of marketing tools to facilitate the whole process. And the fifth point is research agenda. So as we have initiated, there are several institutions across nation as well as the global level. They have been working on several NUS crops with their interest. And in that, how women's interest can be included as part of the research agenda. For example, if we are taking any of the NUS crops, mainly if we are taking leafy vegetables, so their shelf life or any other vegetable shelf life is very less. So in such context, we need to identify the women specific needs like storage infrastructures or any processing. Oliver shown many of the agriculture implements and the machineries. So such machineries are to be identified and needs to be fine-tuned with the support of local women farmers for them to use continuously in order to reduce their labor burden as well as the drudgery. And Another important element is the research approach. And here we adopted right from the beginning, we adopted the transdisciplinary approach. So different stakeholders, excuse me. We brought in several stakeholders right from the beginning, starting with men and women farmers. There are other actors associated with that, including the processes as well as the marketing linkages. So such support services broaden the whole agenda of NUS crop coming into the mainstream market, and development happen at each and every stage. So this approach, many of the research organizations, national research organizations have a very narrow focus. So in such case, the development in the particular NUS crop will be on section wise. It may not be holistic. So in such case, we need to bring a kind of a policy change when we promote NUS crop. Such kind of multi-stakeholder transdisciplinary approach is necessary to have a kind of a holistic development of the particular crop. And the most important part we see is leadership. Leadership by inculcating the leadership right from the beginning is very essential for them to evolve as a leader in taking up the initiative to the next level from their community. And here there are other, apart from our own grassroots institutions, there are legal structures are available. Biodiversity Management Committee, or in many places Joint Forest Management Committees are available. So though by default the membership is gendered, like a 50-50% or 30-40% or 30-70%, still there are gap. Women may not able to participate. If at all, if they are participating, they don't speak. So in this context, we need to develop programs to build the capacity of the women farmers to be part of the committee, to act effectively by bringing their resolutions or taking part in the decision making. So such systems are essential for them to bring the NUS crop in the agenda. Otherwise, it will be a kind of an development with the support of the external people. Then at the policy side, we need to see how the policies with the increased knowledge of wild foods that is protecting the rights of the people. That also we need to consider. So in this context, and there are evidences available how the indigenous knowledge development right from the beginning, it's happening from the childhood days. I mean, childhood times, they are gaining the traditional knowledge and how they are applied this traditional knowledge in their life as they come over. And the final one is recognizing of women's acknowledgement in the traditional crops, especially their culture, which helps them to empower by the community itself on the one end, and other side establish their identity to make the products in a much more bigger scale. So from the research aspect, we need to see important point, data and knowledge gaps on such NUS crop. In the millet case, since we have been working for the past 2 decades, we could able to mobilize or collect data from different perspectives, right from the seed to till market, how the systems are. So such a kind of data generation, there is a gap, and in that gender data collection. So available secondary literatures, we may not able to get such nuanced dimensions. So here, right from the beginning, when we are working on NUS, we need to see how, starting with the ethnography. Ethnography is basically bringing the people's perspective, indigenous people's perspective. So that we need to bring in to understand the whole system, how it is related to their culture and how it is related to their food and how it is related to their livelihoods. So those dimensions, it needs to be part of it. And the design of the whole process should be gender responsive, so that the data will be in a better position to see how it is making a change or impact among men and women, and improving the relations among them at the individual as well as community level. And the final point is, while we promote such NUS crops, since it is localized or it is available in a very minor scale. So in that context, bringing the scale or economy of scale plays a major role for them to coming into mainstream markets. So in such cases, we need to promote collectives, continuously building their capacity to overcome the challenges while coming into the mainstream market. So in that context, the adoption of the 4C approach from conservation to commercialization, there are 4 important steps. So how do we facilitate the whole process, starting with conservation till reaching the market, that is commercialization aspect. And in that, it needs investment on machinery or infrastructure, because that is a challenge in many of the geographical locations where these NUS crops are dominant. That needs to be discussed with the local community, bringing the local institutions to provide such facilities. So with that, I conclude. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ranga. I think both you and Oliver have set a nice context overview, and I think you have emphasized the importance of a disaggregated approach of looking at issues from the perspective of the community, but particularly from the perspective of women. And I think addressing different dimensions of this participation, the recognition, the identity, the participation in data collection and management, and so on. So I would now like to invite our last speaker, Dr. R. Gopinath, who's a development economist, and he's also a principal scientist working at MSSRF with over 15 years of experience, working particularly on issues of food security and agrarian transformation. So I think over to you, Gopi, to give your perspective. I think we have a nice rounded perspective in terms of the context of NUS, the gender dimension, and I think you're going to give us more about the food security dimension of this issue. Over to you, Gopi.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for this nice introduction. And I would like to share some details about the economic dimensions of this neglected and underutilized species, particularly in India. So I thank Dr. Oliver and Dr. Rangalakshmi to nicely highlight some of the crucial issues that is closely associated with the economic aspects of this NUS. So this economic dimension is getting importance in a present context when the production system is moving from subsistence production system into a produce for market kind of situation. Because till some points, but as Rangalakshmi mentioned that before this implementation of this NFSA, it was something like produced for their own consumption and less importance given for this production for market kind of things. Now it is getting importance to produce NUS for market as well, because as Dr. Oliver rightly mentioned out that it's more ecological centric, location specific species are there, or those species may not be replicated in other areas. And Moringa is a good example where it is concentrated in certain areas only. So in these aspects, so economic dimension is getting importance, and farmers are now moving into large scale production as they get more demand. That is a present situation. So this increasing demand happens in 2 major activities. One is the general urban consumers demand more as it gives more food and nutrition, nutritional nutrients to their food. Second one is the researchers and government also promoted this NUS as it has larger impact on that climate change aspect. And government NGOs like MSSRF and other individual players are also emphasizing to promote NUS as it has larger other characteristics. So farmers are getting, motivated to go for large scale production. But when they go for such kind of large scale productions, they face a lot of problems. And again, these NGOs and governments are giving some enabling environment in terms of availability of seeds and agronomic practices and marketing facilities to some extent. But still, we can't say that that all those constraints are completely over. So presently, it's something like the NES markets are highly unorganized. And these organized government organized markets are very limited. That is, the NES completely out of this one, mostly predominantly out of this organized market situation. And we don't have very organized value chains as well, even for the final produce. And the market infrastructure, which is very crucial for NES products, as most of the products are perishable in nature, except this millets, these things. So they don't have a proper market infrastructure facilities. So farmers are forced to sell in the nearby market or within that village or areas, as they don't have a facility to preserve those things, or have a capacity to move into other areas where they get better prices. So, and even this local markets, we know very well how these local markets are there. And particularly in a rainy season, you don't get any such facilities to protect your products from this water and other things. And market value, yes, of course, since there is no market infrastructure and there is no organized market is available, and these farmers are in the hands of that middleman or whoever it is to decide price for their products. And as I already mentioned, that we don't have the farmers are not having any farmers. I can say that the community are not having any incentives to keep NUS either in field or in their lands. So all these things clearly mention that there is a scope to improve income of these farmers who are predominantly small and marginal and poor in nature. So one hand, we have a growing demand, an increasing emphasis on producing more NUS in the field. On the other hand, farmers are moving into large scale production from subsistence produce into produce for the market. And if we improve certain things, it will definitely impact on the income of these small and marginal farmers in those areas. And the studies in Kolli Hills, Koraput, and studies in Madhya Pradesh also clearly highlighted how this impact on the income. And from this economic dimension, when we see these NES products, we can observe certain things. It is highly local resource-centric production process. I see it's an advantage to go for less input cost production on the local level, because inputs can be prepared locally I mean that input preparation can itself happen at the farm level, or with a group of farmers or women can take this as a livelihood opportunity. And we can go for this participatory seed selection system instead of this government seeds, other things. The seed selection can happen with researchers and farmers, as it is more location specific in nature. And the other important thing is we need to nurture animal husbandry in the NUS production process. And some of the papers published from Kolli Hills, it's proved that whenever farmers used this cow dung or animal products in the production, these things, that gives better productivity. And the other thing is, this is we are talking about these drought animals. Okay, it is the local system. So that's why we keep this as local centric production system. So when we nurture this animal husbandry into NUS1, we can realize both better yield and also more livelihood for that local community. So these things, and the final one is, I mean, enhance farmer producers organizations participation in this process of production on different ways. The other thing is that those parts are the production process. The other one is this marketing one. Of course, it's a value chain. So we can see three types of value chains in this NUS crops production. One is local value chain. When we say local value chain, it's for this local market other things. It has that processing facilities. It should have a proper value addition, and importantly, that quality control, because all those things has to be enhanced to have a better economic value for this NUS system. The other important one is public value chain. Here, this public value chain is mainly for this targeting this government and public these things. There, one major support system required is price support. And now this MSP is for all major crops, and even for millets, it's only major millets, though it's happening or not, the procurement happening or not. But the point is, there is a lack of information on cost and cost-based pricing mechanism. So when we promote this NUS at a higher level, we need a proper price support mechanism for all these NUS products, particularly these minor millets, and market infrastructure. Even if it is very difficult to go for public procurement, a better market infrastructure in a local area and also a nearby urban centers where farmers are encouraged to sell their produce, that will enhance the farmers to get higher prices. We can say that example in Tamil Nadu, we have Ulavar Sandais for these vegetable markets. So such kind of market system can be created for NUS products in those locations. And other one is the NUS in PDS, Public Distribution System, Midday Meal Scheme, and the Integrated Child Development Services. In Integrated Child Development Services, we need to find ways to include millets effectively in PDS system, whether it's a full grain or powder, that should get more research. And we need to, yes, it is there under NFSA, millet has to be distributed, but we need to strengthen and ensure the distribution. And Odisha Millet Mission is a very good example for all these things, where they intervened and implement things in the complete chain from production to consumption area. And the third important value chain is private value chain. It's mainly for this urban consumers, targeting urban consumers. All these urban consumers are demanding this NUS as it gives more nutritional values, and the prices, if we go to supermarkets, and we can clearly realize that the prices are very high. But the question is whether those higher prices reach that farmers, or some sustained supply is happening. That is the question mark. I mean, enhanced market infrastructure can facilitate that kind of system. And important thing is, as Oliver rightly pointed out, this branding, packaging, and trading of this NUS to this urban consumers is a very important aspect. And final one is that a strategic placement of these NUS products in this urban market or nearby semi-urban markets. So all these three approaches in value chains can give better economic benefits to farmers. And I would like to summarize that the NUS, the economic enhancement of NUS farmers, that requires better research or more resources on research, infrastructure, and extension services. We need a location-specific and site-specific policies and programs. That is very important, because blanket policies or programs may not be feasible for this NUS crops, as it is more location-specific. So one policy, we take this ICDS. ICDS has a scope to introduce millets. Okay, district authorities or that block authorities can be motivated to include all those NUS crops which are available in their block. So in that manner, we can include in our NUS in a better way in this public food delivery system. And final one is that generation of data, that evidences. Ranga has also highlighted this one. The point is we don't have a data on area, production, and yield of NUS crops. Yes, India has a robust system of having this area, production, yield for our major crops, particularly area at village level we have. But for these crops, we don't have a data. So if we go for any evidence-based policy making or any decision making, we need a data. So it is very much essential to generate this data, area production yield data for these NUS crops. So I end here. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Gopi. I think you have raised some important points that, for major agricultural crops, we have the yield data, income data, etc., which can be calculated. But for these NUS crops, I think all the three speakers have emphasized that there is very little research attention in terms of data, in terms of research, in terms of the pros and cons of these in relation to what we call as major, perhaps, crops. I think I'll probably open up for any questions and comments from the floor now for the speakers. We have some time, and then at the end, I will take a few minutes to give my own thoughts and reflections on this issue. So you can either, people who are online can raise their hands online. If there is anybody in the room who would like to ask a question, please also request a mic from somebody in the room.
We are handing over mics to anybody who would like to have a question. Just a second.
Or even a comment. If you have any experience to share, please feel free to go ahead with that as well.
Good afternoon to one and all. I am Dr. Ramanan from Vellore Institute of Technology, the Center for Micro Enterprises Development, set up by SIDBI, jointly with the VIT. So the International Year of the Millet. So a very good presentation by all the three speakers. So very informative. A similar conference was held last month also in the Hotel Savera by the person who has published the book on millet wheat, the recipe for various millet items. So here I would like to know whether any special schemes of financial assistance, Dr. Gopinath, for financing these farmers who are cultivating these crops, whether, because very difficult. I am also a former banker. I was in the IDBI bank. It's very difficult to get financial assistance despite what we celebrate International Year. We say there's a growing demand, awareness, and all that.
I think so many of you out there, you're existing in your peasant life. You wake up when the alarm goes off.
Financial assistance can be introduced.
Your job.
Lower interest rate.
Sorry. Hi, boss.
Madam, should I respond now or we can do it later?
Nitya, your mic is muted, Nitya.
I'm sorry, that's fine. Yes, Gopi, please go ahead. I was just requesting MSSRF support to mute Mr. Khalid, but I think they have already done it. Gopi, go ahead and respond. About the financial schemes, are there any financial support schemes?
Yeah, my point is the schemes that are already running, those schemes are having this scope. So we need not go for a new scheme. So the point is how to tap these existing policies and schemes to promote this NUS. That's what we need to work out. Here, the requirement is strategies to promote NUS at location specific. I don't think that a separate scheme or financial assistance is required for promoting this NUS. That's my point. Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you, Gopi. Yeah. Did anybody else, Oliver or Ranga, you wanted to add anything to that, Oliver?
There is a Mudra loan scheme up to 10 lakhs without any collateral security.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I am the coordinator for the state of Tamil Nadu. When we approach the banks, particularly in Tamil Nadu, the first thing they say is that the quota is over for this year. Whatever the quota given to each bank is over, number one. Number two, this millet and all that, they do not have much of demand, unlike other crops and all that. So the awareness on the part of the lending institutions, particularly even though the circulars may come from NABARD, RBA and all that, at the grassroots level, it's very much lacking, particularly at the
Absolutely.
and,
Correct. No, you are absolutely right, Mr. Ramanan. I think it's a very important point that we have lots of schemes on paper, but when people go and try to get it, usually it's very difficult, particularly for the poor, to get access to these schemes. Okay, we have some questions coming up now. So I'll next like to ask Mr. Himanshu Thapa, if you can unmute yourself and ask your question. And also, yeah. Are you able to unmute yourself, Himanshu?
We are unmuting him from here.
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah,
Yeah.
please go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm a PhD scholar at Center for Development Studies, Trivandrum, and I'm working in millet cultivation. Particularly, I'm focusing on Odisha Millet Mission. So my question is, millet missions like Millet Mission in Odisha and then Millet Mission in Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, all these millet missions, they are focusing on particularly the major millets, like the finger millet or pearl millet, or maybe on sorghum also. So if we continue this kind of specialization of particular millets, then what about the other millets? Because we can also we can lose out the indigenous seeds of other millets if we only focus on these particular millets. Because we know that these minor millets also have resilience to various kind of war situations during hard times. So some millets could be far better than the major millets also in some aspects. So if we only focus on the particular millets like finger millet, then how can we have a sustainable promotion of millets?
Okay. Good question. Very good question, Himanshu. And I think this is also the problem with these specialist missions. So maybe I will request Oliver to respond to this question.
Thank you. Certainly, the mission programs are having some preferences. Particularly, they are looking at the scale of cultivation, and finally, the agenda of the state missions are they need to reach out to the public distribution system, and also, they look at the economy of scale. If there is an investment has to happen in terms of processing facilities and so on. So I completely agree with your comment that the focus is on the major millets, sorghum, pearl millet, and finger millet, because that has to reach to the masses.
Stupid nigger! Son of a bitch, I hate niggers! You are a nigger! Every single jackass I play with is a stupid nigger! This way.
Okay, so if certainly if you look at from the diversity management point of view, and also looking at the nutrition dimensions of those minor crops, certainly a more integrated approach as well as farmers' preference approach is much needed. That is why alternative seed system model for the local communities, where the community can make their own choices, and based on that, the production system can follow. And my colleague Gopinath also pointing out that local centric value chain is more important. When we take up that kind of angle, then we can have more diversity based approach rather than only productivity and production centric reaching out to the masses. But the government agenda is always need to reach out to the masses. That is why the major minor millet crops are chosen by them. In case of Karnataka, both sorghum as well as finger millet. In case of Odisha, they are focusing on finger millet, to some extent little millet. Chhattisgarh, they are focusing on only finger millet. In Madhya Pradesh, they had looked at only kodo millet because those crops are grown in large scale. So the government will look at from that angle, but we are pitching. It is our duty as a researcher, you and me, our duty to talk about the more diversified approach rather than focusing on. Otherwise, this will become again another disaster from the point of view of eroding diversity on farm, as well as eliminate from the food culture.
Thank you, Oliver. I think you also raised at the end, I think in response to Himanshu's question, a very important point about the diversity. That we, for the future generations, because each of these millets, I think also have different kinds of nutritional values. So just by focusing on some, I think we are also for the future losing the genetic diversity of the wide range of land races, which are not really documented. So I think that was a very good question. Are there any other comments or questions that anybody would like to share?
Nitya, there is one question from here, Charu.
Yeah.
My question. So, first of all, great presentation by one. My question is that although like a significant gains have been made in millet production, and especially in the recent year, the demand for millet production has significantly increased with programs by the government and international bodies. But there still remains a very big productivity gap and in millets and the cereal crops. And when I say millets, in US, I specifically mean the major millets. And most of the millets are usually taken in the rainy season, right? The Kharif season in the central and North India and the southern India. So how do you see that trade-off in production being balanced by the nutritional density of millets? Second is, as Dr. Gopi said, that PDS has to play a very important role in when millet consumption is seen. But learning from PDS inclusion of legumes pulses in PDS, we have like one of the major learning was that because of the irregularities of production, it is very difficult for procurement of crops like that. So how do you think that can be addressed in with context to NUS and millets? And third is important part of millet production and NUS crops is, as Dr. Gopi said, has to have a participatory approach. So, and millets, most of the millets being C4 crops, hybrids are seen as the next big things to increase productivity. So how do you think introduction of hybrids can be done while the seed rights still remain with the marginalized, the small marginal farmers and the women farmers? How do you see that manifesting in of the future? Yeah.
Nitya, who would you like to take this question?
I don't know, whoever would wish to take. I think part of it was about the productivity and yield. So I think whoever would wish, I think maybe it was directed at Gopi. I don't know.
Nitya, I will come in.
Ranga, yes, please.
Yeah. There are three aspects. One is the productivity gap. Productivity gap, definitely, it's a big productivity gap. Most of the millets, I mean, both the major as well as the small millets have been tried at the irrigated condition in the research stations. So you can't compare that yield with the rain-fed condition being raised by the farmers. So we need to be careful while comparing the productivity gap between the research institution as well as the farmer scale. That is one point. And second, with reference to improving the productivity, there are many measures have been brought in by the researchers as well as the practitioners when these millet species or any other nut species are brought into mainstream conditions. One is basically it was under rain-fed condition. The management is very extensive. It is not intensive management practice. They apply farm manure and they go for crop cultivation, especially using the broadcasting methods. But now we are introducing intensive agronomic practices like line sowing, seed treatment. While selecting the seed itself, we need to be careful to have a seed purity, or maintaining the soil health, both using the organic matter as well as with biological inputs. So such kind of productivity improvement agronomic practices have been integrated while promoting things. So by introducing such kind of technology, the yield gap to an extent up to 40 to 60% one can able to maintain it. That is the second point. And the third one is you're talking about hybrids as well as the rights of the thing. In most of the millet species, except pearl millet and sorghum, there is no hybrids. All are varieties, improved varieties developed by several research institutions, or some of them are made from the selection of the land races or traditional varieties. So in such cases, I don't think so that claiming the seed rights may not be kind of an issue at the level, farmers level. But some of the land races as well as the traditional varieties under the Plant Protection and Farmers' Rights Act, they can get recognized. For that, as a researcher or developmental person, we need to facilitate that process of characterization and meeting the standards to get recognition from that authority. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ranga. I actually have my own follow-up question on this, which any of you, either Ranga or Oliver, I think could answer. I think both of you raised the issue of the research agenda and, you know, who sets the research agenda and how is it set and so on. Recently, when I was doing some work in Jharkhand, actually, I spoke to the agricultural research people in the university about some of these locally especially the greens. I think, Oliver, in your initial list, there was also, apart from millets, there was also many greens which were mentioned in that, and basically which are very nutritious. And while they have been documented, they say that many of these greens, for instance, are weeds. So the agriculture research, their response was that these are weeds. So we cannot give the seeds of this to the farmer because these are weeds, and we don't research on weeds. So I think it's just a question. It just came to my mind that in a way, there's the same thing which was done with neglected and underutilized in terms of making them, you know, branding them or stigmatizing them. Some very nutritious greens are also stigmatized as weeds, and they are freely collected, but because they are called as weeds, nobody realizes its value, and nobody, you know, is the younger generation particularly is not encouraged to consume them. They think that this is some, you know, not just something wild, which is not very good. So I'm just wondering that whether, when you're talking about the research and the practices and so on, just like you mentioned, Ranga, about the millets, that whether there are also, you know, a gap, or there is actually existing research about, you know, other kinds of underutilized, you know, the whole list of crops that you showed the photos of, Oliver, at the start, many of which, like moringa, of course, are trees or leaves, some are bushes, some are weeds. What is the state of research on some of these other underutilized crops?
To me, you know, it is very, very less. You know, for example, you are referring to the amaranthus. There are wide range of varieties of amaranthus. Usually, you know, it happens like this. Wherever we go to the villages, at the end of the day, the women come from the farmland. She will carry a child, and also on the head, there will be some implements, and on the other side, some cattle, and she'll be holding some greens. We see. So for a researcher, I'm not actually blaming, but for the researcher, they will see it is a weed. But for the villages, it is not a weed, it's a food. But the problem here is that, as we have done in the case of millets, or in any kind of recently popularized new species in the R&D, many of these less known, you know, the greens of the villages, we have not tested any kind of participatory research. Almora Research Station, they have been working on this for a very, very long time. Two aspects is missing in the context of NUS. One is the field-based participatory research and development, as in the case of millets, what we have done with the communities. The other gap is that There are many research institutions like Almeida Research Institution. They have been working on amaranth species, but those seeds and that agri technology is not reaching to the communities. So one is the extension gap, other one is that participatory research. In case of millets or Andean grains or turf, this kind of experiments have happened. Even in the sorghum, all sorghum land races in Ethiopia, people have done it. And they have linked with seed bank and so on, gene bank and so on. But for many of the minor crops, both at the on-farm level research, participate research, or whatever happening in the research laboratory, the extension gap is there. That has to be addressed, and that is a critical gap. Rest will follow. Once there is a momentum happens and people started talking about it, the case stories are coming out of it. That is how we realized in the context of millets. So that is the important area. We need to have both ends. The whatever available in the research shelf, that has to reach the farmer. On the other side, participatory research needs to happen on the ground. Yeah.
Thank you, Oliver, for that response. Is there anybody else in the room, Sangeeta?
No, I think is there any other question? No, I don't think there's a question from here.
Comments?
Can I respond to his PDS question, ma'am?
Yes, sure.
Charu, I feel the major difference between these pulses, legumes, and grains under PDS system is something like grains. The FCI clearly said that estimation, procure it at a given price, and redistribute to all areas. But for pulses and this one legumes, the central government allotted resources amount. So the FCA or the state governments, they have a collaboration with the NAFED or whoever it is, and they distribute it. So the demand here is something like a complete chain of setup from production to distribution. So that's how we can say that assured prices to farmers who are producing this NUS, particularly these minor millets, and then redistribute those things to consumers through PDS system. So if we go for wheat and rice model in this NUS, then we will definitely avoid this this one and sustainability in this PDS availability. Thank you.
Thank you, Gopi.
Yeah. So I think we don't have any questions both from online as well as offline. And so I just wanted before we close to just apologize for the interruptions. We've been having some hacking issues, even morning session and even this session a bit. So that's why we are not allowed video this time. As much as possible, you try to keep it at this level. So thank you so much. And I think thank you to the chair, Professor.
So maybe, just 1 second, Sangeeta. I think let me say a few things before you wind up the session. So just to summarize, I think the very excellent presentations made by our 3 speakers. And I just wanted to reflect on this from a sort of pulling back from the exact NUS itself to a wider issue of justice. I think globally we talk a lot about environmental justice, social justice, economic justice, and I think justice has become a very important issue for the future of humanity, to ensure that everybody has a good life. This is also the agenda of the Sustainable Development Goal in terms of leave no one behind, and so on. So I think what the 3 speakers have pointed out is 3 very important dimensions of justice. The first is recognition. So whether it is recognition of the knowledge holder, of the custodian, whether it is the woman, whether it is the man, whether it is the indigenous farmer, we have to recognize them as very important sources of knowledge. This is also a problem with science. I think Dr. Ranga pointed out, or I don't know, Oliver, all the speakers, in fact, that there is a real gap in terms of science and technology, in terms of what questions are taken for research, what are presented and what are not. So that whole process is really about recognizing and giving legitimacy to different kinds of knowledges. I think more recently, there is recognition of indigenous people and indigenous knowledges, and there is a big global movement around it. But I think in India or in many of the countries of the global south, there is still inequality or a hierarchy of knowledge in terms of what is science, which educated people like us do, and what is a local knowledge, women's knowledge, or indigenous knowledge. So I think recognizing that and giving recognition to that, to the people, is as important as giving recognition to the crops. And I think today we've been speaking about the underutilized or the neglected crops. Why are certain crops neglected? Why has there been more research on irrigated lands? Or as Ranga pointed out, a lot of the research is in irrigated conditions. Why not, there's a lack of research even in terms of agriculture on arid or non-irrigated rain-fed areas. So there is this kind of a gap in terms of recognition of the importance of different crops, different lands, different people. So that's one very important element, I think, which has come out by our deep dive focus into these millets and other neglected and underutilized species today. The second important element of justice is, of course, the redistribution or the distribution of resources. Again, some of the speakers, right from Oliver onwards, raised the issue of creating assets, for these communities, whether it is market infrastructure, whether it is storage. I think somebody from the field, Mr. Ramanan, also raised the issue of finance and capital and the distribution of finance and capital to different crops or to different people and so on. I have seen from the last many years, like for instance, the banking policies in Jharkhand, where I worked a lot, was that the loan amount for the Kisan credit card was based on the size of land holding. So if a larger farmer could get more land, and this agricultural census also shows us this, whereas a smaller farmer can get less agricultural credit. Similarly, women, if they are not landowners, they don't get agricultural credit. So I think there are lots of issues around the redistribution of assets, the redistribution of resources, and so on, which is, I think, very, very critical. And I think Ranga probably did not use this word, but I think when she spoke about collectives and the importance of the need to promote collectives, whether it is of women farmers or whether it is of indigenous farmers or poor farmers, I think it is really an issue of, for these smallholders, for the people who are marginalized in terms of unequal power relationships in our society, it is very difficult for them to compete with a private enterprise or a big production company in terms of the markets. So today you have, for instance, millets, big companies like Tata's and so on have entered the marketing space. So Oliver, you showed the picture of the branding and the Kolli Hills Foods, but Kolli Hills Foods cannot really compete vis-a-vis a large brand like Tata's. And I think this is where the role of collectives, in terms of how do we try and put together the power of collectives, the power of scale, in order to be able to compete with some of the bigger players. I think many, many years ago, Dr. Kurian showed us in the case of Amul and the milk dairy cooperatives, that just small producers with one cow or two cows or buffaloes, how they became a large enterprise like Amul. But there were some lessons to learn also from there, that the power of collectives is also that you get, I think all of you mentioned about the need for support services, for support infrastructure, not just in terms of practices or drudgery reduction, but also in terms of the market, that how do you advertise? Recently in the newspapers, I think everybody is familiar with Amul advertisement. Recently, Dakuna passed away, who had for the last 50 years been doing the Amul Girl ad, which was became a household recognized. So I think that, how do we also strategize in order to, if you really want to redistribute resources equitably in society, then we have to also think of support in terms of marketing, in terms of advertising. I think Gopi, you referred to these different kinds of value chains. And the third, I think, very important dimension of justice, which also came out from the presentations, from all of them, is about issues of representation and voice. That who sets the agenda, who has the voice on the table. I think the question that came up about seed rights, for instance, from the floor, as these get commercialized, will the rights go to somebody else? Will the decisions be taken by somebody else? How far do policies really respond to the local needs? I think this example of the greens I asked, and I think you responded very well, Oliver, that, how will that come into the agenda? How will agricultural research organizations start focusing on these green leafy vegetables or greens, which so far they term as weeds? But as you know, every woman carries it back from the fields every day. In fact, this came up in the context of, I was asking the agriculture department people, because they have schemes for, in the north, it is called Didi Badi or kitchen garden or nutrition garden or whatever it is. And they give a package of seeds through the livelihood support mission as well, seed kits to individual women for their backyard garden. So I was saying that, can you not include some of these instead of only exotic species like cauliflower and spinach, which is usually given in these seed packets, which are not indigenous? Can you not include some of these indigenous amaranths and so on? And to that, I got the response that actually these are weeds and we don't have any agricultural research and we do not produce the seeds. So only we can give to the farmer what he produces seeds. So you already see the bias in terms of how the decisions are made and, you know, what is given and what is not given. So I think that, you know, when we work, probably listening to this, I thought that, you know, the work that all three of you have presented from the perspective of MSSRF, in a way, really talks to or speaks to a lens of social justice, economic justice, and political justice in terms of representation, and of course, environmental justice also in terms of climate resilience, soil fertility, which many of these NUS crops actually, because they are locally adapted, so they don't need extra fertilizers, pesticides. They can be grown under organic or agroecological conditions. So they are also good for the environment. So I really learned a lot, and thank you very much, you know, for initiating this this conversation. And we should really take this forward, this whole issue of forgotten foods and neglected and underutilized species, from also this perspective of you know, environmental, social, and economic justice. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining. And I'd like to hand over back to Sangeeta now.
Thank you, Nitya. I think there's a great summary, and I think it's quite a good learning for everybody, both who have joined us online as well as here. Thanks so much for taking this time off. I know you're in the middle of another conference and you managed to squeeze this in for us. So thank you so much for being available and having this session. And also the three speakers, Dr. Ranga, Dr. Oliver, and Dr. Gopi, for taking this time off and actually sharing the knowledge, which I think we gained a lot, because underutilized species is not something it's not an everyday conversation for many of us. So I think this has been a real good experience, learning experience. And thanks for everybody who has joined us both online as well as in person. And have a good day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.